Hello, everybody, and welcome. So we're going to go ahead and talk about pivot tables. We are in a Teams meeting. So at any time you do have any questions, we can go ahead and put those in the chat box. And the little paper airplane will go ahead and send those for us and let us know if there's any questions. And of course, since we are in a Teams meeting at any time, go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to come off mute and ask any questions. If you'd like to go ahead and turn on the live captions, those will be located underneath the three dots. Once you select the three dots, go ahead and select turn on live captions anytime during the show. So we'll go ahead and we're going to talk about pivot tables. So my name is Susan. I'll be your presenter here today. And I have Chapra with me. He's going to help answer any questions you have today. So today's session, we're going to learn some of the tools that are more advanced features in Excel. Pivot tables are a powerful tool to calculate, summarize, analyze data that lets you see comparisons, patterns, and trends in your data. Excel learns your patterns, organizing your data to save you time. Easily create tables in your spreadsheets and use modern functions. With new charts and graphs, Excel helps you present your data in compelling ways. Easily create forecasts to predict trends with just a click. From here, we're going to go ahead and go with the demonstration. So here I am. I'm going to be, see, okay, here we are. I'm on my pivot table sheet here on my worksheet. So before diving into the intricacies of pivot tables, let's look at some of the benefits of using a table as the data source. With a table, you can refresh and add the dimension changes to the pivot table. This section focuses on the data. So data can either be in a range or in a table. Data should be continuous, no empty rows or columns. The occasional empty cell is fine. For ranges, if the input in a range, any changes to the dimensions, as an example, adding rows or columns, will not be reflected in the pivot table until you change the source. For tables, if the input data is a table, changes to the dimensions will automatically be included when you refresh the data. Column headings. If you change the column headings, the pivot table will not recognize the name, and you will want to re-include them in the pivot table. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the pivot table here. So I'm on my pivot table sheet, and I'm just going to go ahead and select any cell in my table. Once I had selected any cell in my table, I'm going to go ahead and select the table design. In the table design, I'm going to find an option to summarize with a pivot table. So to get here, I selected my table, selected my table design, and then I'm going to go ahead and say summarize with pivot table, which will be closer to the left-hand side at the top. Go ahead and select that. Here, it's going to ask me the table range. I can put in a new worksheet or the existing, but I want to keep it on a new worksheet. I can go ahead and rename this if I would like to as well. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and select OK. All right, here we are. So we have we have our pivot table here. I'm going to go ahead and right click my sheet 1 because I want to rename my sheet 1. I'm going to go ahead, say rename. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and rename this to Pivot Tab 1. I'm going to hit Enter. So now I know where my pivot table is. So to review, to get to the pivot table here, I started on my pivot table input. I selected a cell on my table. I went into the table design and I selected Summarize with Pivot Table. Once I selected that, it asked me the range and we said okay. And then we went and we created our table here on our new tab for Pivot Tab 1 that we have renamed. So I want to show you moving the data into the cells here, which will fill out our pivot table. So right now the pivot table doesn't know what to show us. So the first thing I want to do is I want to grab my location and I'm going to go ahead and drag that into my rows here. Here we can see the pivot table is starting to give me some information. I'm going to go ahead and drag my title into the rows as well. I'm going to drag my doodads into my values and my gadgets into my values. So here we can see our table is starting to be filled out. So with this, I want to show you that we can also add more data into our table before we start manipulating the data a little bit. So what I'm going to go to do is I'm going to go back into my pivot table input here. And what I want to do is remove the total row. And then I want to go ahead and add data into my table. Go ahead, scroll down a little bit here. As I want to show you the total row that's down here. And I'm going to go into my table design. Under table design, I can go ahead and remove the total row. It's going to ask me if I want to do that because this could create errors, but for this exercise, it won't create any. So we'll go ahead and say okay. Now it removed my total row for me. What I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add some more cells below. I'm just going to highlight the bottom 3 here. And I'm going to copy those. And I'm just going to paste them below here. And I'll hit enter to go ahead and remove, or I can hit escape. So in here, I want to go ahead and rename these on the left-hand side here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this from Los Angeles. I'm going to say New York. There it goes. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to rename the bottom 3. So that will give me another place to go ahead and add in. All right. So now I'm going to go back into my pivot tab here. Oh, one more. Before I do one more, I'm going to go ahead and add one more thing next to my gadgets here. I do want to add in one more item first. So in here, I want to go ahead
and I'm ready to go in your system, but if they're not there, then that's obviously a problem. So
Yeah.
And I want to go ahead and enter in one more object. I want to add in a gizmo. So for this, what I want to do is I want to add together the doodad and the gadget. So in my formula tab here, I'm just going to go ahead and say equals. And then I'm going to use a bracket. Here it is. Okay, my bracket. And then I'm going to say at doodad. And then I'm going to go ahead and close my bracket. And then I'm going to say plus. And then I want to do the gadget. So I'm going to go ahead and put my bracket here. And I want to say at gadget. And then close my bracket here. Okay. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and hit enter. Let's see if I did the calculation right. There we have another column. I'm going to go ahead and rename my column. I'm going to rename this to Gizmo and hit enter. So now I will have more information added. So I added another item and I added another city. And I'll show you here. I have my first cell highlighted. So this was the formula that I used. What I did is I added my doodad, which we put in the @ sign. We saw it grab the doodad. And then we also have the gadget and we added them together. I double click, here we can see the selected the doodad and the gadget. All right, so now we'll go back into our pivot table here. So now that we added some information, we can see we don't have our new areas yet, and we don't have our new column. So what I want to do is I'm going to go back into my pivot table analyze here, and I'm just going to hit the refresh button. Once I select the refresh button, we can see New York has been added within my table, but we don't see the gizmo yet. So if I look into my pivot table fields, I will find my gizmo. I can go ahead and select gizmo. And now I have updated my table. It gave me my new item as well as my new city. Okay, so this was able to update the table because the information we used for the pivot table was in a table. So if this information wasn't in a table, we would actually have to go and re-add the information in our table. So by creating your pivot table from a table, we can easily add the information on with the refresh button. So from here, we're going to look at some field customizations. Have we been doing okay with questions, Jeffro?
Yeah, so far so good.
So here we can arrange the fields to display the data we would like to see. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag my location. And I'm going to go ahead and drag that into filters. So here we can see at the top left-hand side, it brought me a drop down. If I go ahead, select the drop down here, I can say select multiple items. And here I can easily change the data I'd like to see. So if I don't want to see Los Angeles, for example, I could say okay, and it will only show me the data based on those locations. I can go ahead and select my drop down, select my item back, say okay, and it will bring my numbers back. I can also do this with the title. I'm going to go ahead and drag the title up. I'm going to drag my location back in. So here we could see it changed our rows with our titles here. If I go ahead and select the drop-down menu here for row titles, here I can change my city. If I select the drop-down under all here, I can change it to if I only want to see associates or a manager. I have lots of ways to go ahead and change the data I'd like to see. I can go ahead and drag this back down, but I also want to show you within the rows, we can see the location is on top of the title right now. If I want to, I can move the title on top of the location. So here we can see it changes the view of how we see our data. So depending on which way we'd like to see the data, we can just move them around in the different boxes. So we're going to look a little bit more in the Pivot Table Analyze tab. So in my pivot table, I have selected the Pivot Table Analyze tab. we're going to look at the field list button on the right-hand side here. Right here, we have our field list. It's at the top of the list here. If I were to select that, we can see on the right-hand side, my field has disappeared. If I select it again, it will bring my field back. So if I accidentally closed it out, this is where I can go ahead and find my field list. The next one would be the buttons. If we'll notice on the left-hand side here, we have some buttons where we can minimize. If I go ahead, select the buttons, we can see they all disappear. So I cannot minimize any of those sections, but I can go ahead and bring them back. So I can go ahead and I can minimize and expand them. Here we can see we can bring them a little smaller. A little tricky to get the mouse in that little corner, but we can bring those back. Okay, and we have our field headers. If I go ahead, select the field headers, it will go ahead and turn that off. We'll notice here in our first box is the row labels. So that will go ahead and turn on and off our row labels. This allows me to have the drop down for the row labels where I can go ahead and change what I'd like to see. Okay. Hey, everyone doing okay so far? All right. So here we have our active field up at the top left-hand side. We can go ahead and change the information in our active field as well. Let's see. If I go ahead and select the sum of doodad here, maybe I want to change the name of that. Maybe I want to just say it's called doodads. I go ahead and backspace all that. If I select enter, we can see it won't rename it because that name is already taken. So if I go in here, I'm going to go ahead and rename this. Let's backspace all that up. And I'm going to say, put an S on the end, and I'm just going to call it doodads. Go ahead, hit enter. Here we can see it allowed me to change it to doodads because that name wasn't taken. Okay. I can also do this for the gadget. So I can go ahead and change this. So we can go ahead and give these custom names as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and backspace. I'm going to just put a little S at the end, and we'll call this gadgets. And then we can do this also for Gizmo. This one. Just put an S at the end. So we can go ahead and rename all of our columns here. So underneath the name where we had named them, I'm going to go ahead and select back into doodads here. We have our field settings. I'm going to go ahead and select the field settings here. And here we can see the custom name. If we want to go ahead and rename it, we have that name here. Within here, I want to go ahead and go to number format. So I selected the field settings that is under the name that we renamed our field. And then I'm going to select the number format that's at the bottom left-hand corner. In here, I can go ahead and change this to a number. And if I want to remove or add my decimals, we can go ahead and remove the decimals. And I can use the 1000 separator here. Once I went and select that, we'll say OK. And then we'll say OK. And we can see it added the comma within my row here. So we can go ahead and do that for gadgets. We'll select the gadgets. We'll select field settings. I'm going to go to number format, select number. I'm going to go ahead and use the 1000 separator. I'm going to remove the decimals and say OK. and OK one more time. And then for the last one. So we'll have all of our information uniform here. All right, so as a note here, when formatting the numbers, it's best to do in the pivot table. So the number formats stay with the table. If they are not done in the pivot table, but from the Home tab, the formatting will stay with the sheet. Okay. I'm going to go ahead into design here. And under design, it gives us a lot more options to work with our table. Okay, so if I go ahead and select the drop down here on the right-hand side, I can change the colors of my pivot table. Maybe I don't want the default blue. Maybe I want to change to an orange and makes a little bit brighter day for me. Or I can even use the more shaded colors if I prefer a lighter color. We can go ahead and select the one that makes us enjoy our data a little bit more. Okay. And then we have on the left-hand side, we have options to add in subtotals, grand totals, blank rows. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a blank row first. If I go ahead and select the blank row, I'm going to go ahead and insert a line after each item. So here we can see it entered a line at the bottom of each section here. And then I'll go into subtotals here. And I can say, do not show subtitles or show all the subtitles. So if I went and showed the subtitles, here we can see it gave me the information here. I can say, do not show the subtitles. It will remove them. And the same with the grand total is I can turn the grand total off if I don't want to view that as well. Next to here, we can see we have the options for our row headers, our column headers. So however we would like to lay these out, let's see, it shows a little bit here, our banded columns here, and we have our banded rows. We can see it puts these little dots in between there, there's little lines. It looks like it makes our cells highlighted. So from here, I'll go back into Pivot Analyze, and we'll look at some slicers. In here, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have a cell selected in my pivot table. And then I want to go ahead and I want to insert a slicer, which is in the middle section. It looks like the filter area here. So under the Pivot Table Analyze tab, we want to have one of our cells selected to make sure we have the Pivot Table Analyze tab. And then we can go ahead and say Insert Slicer here. Now I have several slicers I can insert. I can insert locations and titles, names, our items. But for this one, I want to go ahead and I'm going to select a location and a title. This is going to give me two slicers. So if I say OK, we can see it gave me two slicers as I'm going to drag one over here so I can see them side by side. Now I'm going to go ahead and select the location one. Here we can see up in the middle, we can change our slicer colors. So maybe I want to make this a little different color to make it stand out from the other one. I can even do darker colors if I prefer the darker colors. Okay, I'll make it green and make it a little different from the other one. Okay. From here, we can also change our name here. We have our location. So if this one, maybe we want to change the location of this one, I'm just going to call this cities. Hit enter, and we have renamed the cities. So that way it will have more meaning for me. And I can also do the same with the titles if I prefer to do that as well. If I go ahead and select an option within the slicer, it will go ahead and filter out my data for me, depending on which options I've selected here. If I want to, I can go ahead and clear out my filters by selecting the filter with the X next to it on both of my slicers. It will bring my data back. The little button that is next to the filter is the select all button or select multiple. If I go ahead and say select multiples, I can deselect a couple here and we can see it's leaving those few selected. If I go ahead, remove my filters, and we'll go ahead and clear those out. So I'd like to also show you that we can change the size of the slicer. So I have my slicer selected on the right-hand side. Maybe I need a little bit bigger buttons. Maybe I need them a little wider, or maybe they're too big. I can make them smaller, depending on how much text I have in here or how big I like those buttons. The one next to that increases the size of the table, so we can see the outline is moving if I use the height and the width on the one on the far side. So both of the buttons on the right-hand side, so we have for buttons and the size of the chart, will go ahead and let me resize my slicer. So if I think the slicer is too small, I can go ahead and make it larger. Might make it easier for me to see the buttons. Okay, did we have any questions with the pivot tables or slicers?
I don't see any questions right now in the chat, but if any of our attendees has any questions, feel free to type it in the chat or maybe come off mute and ask your questions or even raise your hand.
Okay. From here, I'm going to go ahead and go into the VLOOKUP. And we're going to go to the Lookup tab. So for VLOOKUP, look in the left in the column for an array and a return of the value from the indicated column. So I'm going to go into my formula box here, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that formula. So I can go ahead, and look up some information here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the FX button. This is my next to my function button here next to my formula bar. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to search for lookup. And I'll hit enter. Here it gives me several options of different things I can use for lookup, but I want to select the VLOOKUP one. I'll go ahead and select VLOOKUP, and I can say OK, or I can double click. I'll go ahead and select OK. For in here, we're going to want to fill out some information. So for this, I'm going to be searching for a gadget. So here in my VLOOKUP value, I'm going to go ahead and enter C7. So here we can see it's looking for a gadget. And then I need my table array. So this is the range containing the data that we want to search and retrieve the data from. So I can go ahead and I can just highlight my table right on over here and just select my table. And there it entered in my table information. Underneath, we want our column index number. So this is the column from which the matching value would be returned. So we want the value for April, which is the 4th month. So since the table array contains the column and the product names, we're going to enter a 5 instead of a 4. So I'm going to show you here. I'm going to drag my table down. So here, since on the left-hand side, we can see A has our products. And then at the top in row 1, we have our dates. So from here, we want to go ahead and see how many cells over. So here we can see it's under E, which would be our 5th column. So we just need to go ahead and add on 1 if we went and entered in our table names. If we started from column B, then we would be 1 from column B. So depending where we start in our table, that's where we want to start counting. So for this one, since we're looking in April, we'll go ahead and add in a 5. For the range lookup, I'm going to go ahead and enter false. Okay, then here we can see the calculation here is our 10.15, and it's quite of a large number. If I go ahead and say okay, we can see our formula was rounded down to 10.16. Of course, we can add the decimals. If I go into my numbers and just start adding those the wrong way, go the other way, we can bring our number and make it larger. And we have that larger number here as well. So true versus false. False is recommended as it returns an exact match. Use false whenever possible. Also, with false, the data does not need to be sorted. True remains Excel's approximate match, which may not be what you expected for the results. Okay, so from here, we want to look at, let's see, this is going to be XLOOKUP. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down a little bit here. So we have our XLOOKUP here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select my first name here. And I'm going to go ahead and select my functions bar here. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to search for XLOOKUP, or wrong functions bar, or let me go ahead and I want to delete that. I'm going to go ahead and select my functions. We'll go ahead and look for XLOOKUP. Hit enter, and we'll go ahead and say okay. So for this one, I want to go ahead. So this one, search for the type of information that are used in VLOOKUP. For this, I want to look up the employee ID and have the result of the name from the ID number. So in here, I'm going to look up G20, which is the employee ID number. I'm going to move my box over so I can show you the green here is G20. That is my employee ID number I want to look up. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter G20 here. I'll hit tab. Now my lookup array. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and look up the ID list. And I'm not going to go ahead and put the column name, but I'm just going to go ahead to my ID list number here. Go ahead, highlight that ID list number. So I'm going to look for that ID number in that list. And what do I want it to return? So I wanted to return the name. So for that, I want to go ahead and highlight my first name. Go ahead and select those. So if the item is not found, I want to go ahead and enter none. So that way, if the item isn't found, it's going to say none. For the match mode, I'm going to go ahead and enter a 0. So the exact match is what this is going to be. If it is not found, it's going to return the none for the not found. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and say okay. Here we'll be able to see it brought Lewis because that is the ID number corresponded with the name. And match and index will just kind of explain a little bit. Match is the look for a value in an array and returns the relative position of the array. For an example, if we use a personnel roster and a list of employees that have completed a training seminar, on the personnel roster, you can use the match function to find the employee ID on the training list. If there's a match, you'll get the row number. So here we can see we have the ID number, and it is telling me it is in row 2. So here, this is the formula that was used to create that match. And we have our index here. So the index returns the value or a reference to a value from within a larger table or range. So if you go into a table, a range of data, and get the value from the intersection from the second and the third row. So this example is looking at the row 2 and column 3 to see what is in that cell. So here we can see it brought up level 100. So this was the formula to look up the row 2, column 3 to let me know that that level was a level 100. From here, we move into the logic sheet. So we're going to look at concat. So concat combines the text from multiple ranges and or strings. If I were to go ahead and select the cell C2 here, we can see this is the formula for the concat. If I go ahead and select the function box here, this has it wrote out for me. So here we can see we are looking from the text from B2, which is my first. So that's going to be the beginning of our text. And then we want to go ahead and put a spaces in here. So the double quotes with a space in between is what's in text box number 2. This is to go ahead and add a blank space between the words. And then, of course, our next text box is going to be B3, where it says car. And then we have our space. And then for B4, which is the last part of our sentence. We go ahead and say OK. We were able to see it string together our sentence. For text join, for these ones, I'll go ahead and select text join here. I'll select the functions box here. Here we can see it has a delimiter. Here we can see it's set with a comma. So if we noticed in our text here, before I had opened the text box, it was separated by a comma. But if I don't want to use a comma, I can use a dash or any other symbol I want to go ahead and separate my data with. The next option here we have is to ignore the empty cells, which we have set as true. Okay, I want to explain a little bit more the delimiters before moving into there. So the delimiter is required. So this is the use of a text string, either empty or 1+ characters, enclosed by the double quotes. Note if a number is used, the Excel would treat it as a text. And then for the ignore empty, we have it set for true. So text join will ignore any empty cells. If we put it as false, it will add the empty cells in there. So if there was empty cell, since I'm using a dash, it would just create multiple dashes next to each other for that empty cell. Versus if I put it as ignore the empty cells, it will skip the cell and just have a single dash. Underneath would be the text. This is also required. This can be a string in an array, such as a range of cells, as seen in this example. And we can have options to add in another text field, text 2, 3, and this will go up to 252 text fields. And then when we're ready, we'll go ahead and select OK. So the text field for this is this table this range over here on the left-hand side where it says dollars, euros, francs, and pesos. We'll go ahead and say OK. And here we can see it combined them together with a dash where before it had a comma. Here we can look at the switch. So switch evaluates one value against a list of values and returns the result that corresponds to the first matched value. If there is no matched, an optional default may be returned. In our examples, we do not want to show all 7 days of the week. For Monday through Friday, it's going to show the day, but it will show weekend for Saturday and Sunday. So if I go ahead and select the cell here where the number 3 is, we'd want to use the weekday function to get the corresponding day of the week. So if I select the function bar here we can see the serial number is B14. So B14 has my day of the week. So it's going to let me know which day of the week in number format that's going to fall under. Okay, so if we go ahead and say OK, that brings me to the third day of the week. So Sunday would be 1, Monday would be 2, or Tuesday would be the third day in the week in Excel. Underneath the 3, we can see here is our switch for Tuesday here. Okay, if I go ahead and select the function bar here we can see the expression. It is pulling from C14. The value is 2, which is going to result in a Monday, where the default value is 3, result in Tuesday. And we can go ahead and continue on. If I scroll through here, we can see it has the multiple days here. Too far, bring it back up. Okay, try to use a little scroller here. And as we can see, it lays out the days of the week here. And then when we get after Friday, we can see it says for weekend. Go ahead and say OK. And here we can see our result was for Tuesday, being the third day of the week. Whereas we can see this one is weekend because it is falling on a Sunday, where it is the first day of the week. All right, from here, we're going to look through some charts. So I want to kind of show you a couple examples of some charts. For this first one would be a line chart. Go ahead, select anywhere in my table, and I'm going to go ahead and insert. Under Insert, next to our recommended charts, I can select the line chart drop-down, and it gives me lots of different options to choose from. I'll go ahead and select this chart here. Here we were able to insert a chart. I can go ahead and select a line on my chart. On the chart side, we can see the line has highlighted the chart where I have of which line I have selected. I can select the other line. We can see the information moves back and forth, so I know which line I'm looking at. But I can also change the colors here if I'd like to. But I'm going to go into my Home tab here. No, sorry. I'm going to go into my Format tab. Under the Format tab, I am going to go ahead and find my shape fill, and I can also find my shape outline. What I wanted to highlight for this is with these line charts, we can see there's a line and there are little circles here. I can go ahead and change the color. So we'll go ahead and let's make this yellow. We can see for the shape fill, it fills in my circles. If I did a shape outline, it will go ahead and fill in my line. Let's get a different color. So here we can see that's how you would go ahead and have multiple colors within your line chart. You can have the circles would be the shape fill, or the line is the shape outline. If I move over to pie chart, I go ahead, select my chart or my table, my insert, and go ahead and select the pie chart drop down. I have lots of pie charts to be able to select from, and even a donut chart. I'll go ahead, select my pie here. So for this one, I want to show you adding the data labels. So I'm going to go ahead and select the plus sign on the right-hand side. go ahead, add in the data label. So the data labels are inserted inside of our pie chart here. Before I move on past the pie chart, I wanted to, for the line charts are best used in a series. In our example, we had 2 years of unit sales for gadgets and widgets. And of course, for our pie chart, more simple data. For a scatter chart here, go ahead, select the scatter. These plots are used to plot 2 measurable series against each other. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select my gadgets and widgets here, but I'm not going to go ahead and select the dates. So we'll just go ahead and select these right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and insert. And I'm going to select my scatter, which is the little dots right here. We can see it gives me a few. I can have dots and lines, or just lines, or I even have bubbles if I want to get some bubble charts here. We'll go ahead, select my dots. Here we can see it highlights my chart where the information is being pulled. I can go ahead and select on here, and we can see it shows my formula there within my chart as well. And we have a tree map. So a tree map is a type of hierarchy chart that is used to compare values across hierarchy levels. It shows the proportions within these levels as rectangles, where the data must be sorted appropriately for the chart to present reasonable results. So here I have my incorrect sort. I'm going to go ahead and select my correct sort first. And then I'm going to go ahead and select insert. And then I want to select the tree map here. I'm going to just go ahead and select the top one. And we have a sunburst option here. I'll select the tree map. And then I'm going to go ahead and rename this. I'm going to call this one correct sort. I'll hit enter. So this way we know which chart this is. I'm going to shrink it a little to give me some space. Move my chart over. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the incorrect sort. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert that as a tree map as well. Go ahead and change my title here. Hit enter. And here we go. I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down a little bit so I can put them near each other so we can see them. So here we can see the correct sort is a little bit more organized than the incorrect sort. We are able to see, let me move the incorrect sort a little bit here. The data has been sorted out. In the correct sort, we can see the gadgets and gizmos and widgets are organized together. Where on the incorrect sort, we can see they are not all together. They are separated out. So for the tree map, it makes more sense for the rectangles that are sorted by color. For the second tree map, while the boxes are sized appropriately, the color does not add clarity and the chart, and the item is also listed twice. So here we can see gadgets are on here 2 times, gizmos. So here we can kind of get a little example here of how they are listed out. Okay. And then we have our combo here. So for this one, I'm going to show you 2 items with different scales on the same chart. With a combo chart, a 2 y-axis sometimes might be the better choice. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the total revenue. Let's see, is it total revenue, and I'm going to select business revenue here. To select both of these, go ahead. Let's see the control button. I selected the control button and it should, okay, it looks like we got both of them highlighted here. So I selected one and hit the control button and select the second one. If I go into insert and I just select the line chart, for example, here, it gives me some options here. I'm just going to select my line here. And here we can see it gives me my total revenue and my business revenue in two different lines, so I can compare them next to each other. And then from here, we look into our conditional formatting. So the first section here is our data bars. So for using conditional formatting to visually explore and analyze data, a conditional format changes the cell appearance based on conditions you specify. If conditions are true, the cell range is formatted. If the conditions are false, the cell range is not formatted. And we have, for this example, we have 15 individuals selling doodads. So today we're going to look at some options to highlight the top performers. So for the data bars, the goal is to get an overall view of the employee sales. Data bars format the data based on the values. Excel overlays a bar chart on the values, with the largest value having the longest bar, while the lowest value has the shortest. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight my data bars section here. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm on the Home tab. I'm going to select the conditional formatting. And I'm going to go down to where it says data bars. In here, I have the options for gradient fills and solid fills. So a solid fill tends to, solid fills of bars tend to be darker and larger, and the largest bar completely fills the cells. For a lighter color, a gradient may be easier to read. So I'll go ahead and show you what a solid fill may look like. As we can see, it's dark and it does start to cover our numbers. If I go ahead and select the data bars, the gradient fill here, as we can see, it makes it a little bit lighter at the end, making it a little bit easier for us to see our numbers. And we can also see here that the larger numbers have almost the entire cell filled out as well. The next one would be the icon sets. I'd want to go ahead and highlight the section for icon sets here. So this time we're going to classify the values into 3 categories. So each icon set represents a range. So on the Home tab, I'll go back into my conditional formatting, and I'm going to go into icon sets here. So I have options to select arrows, shapes, informationals, colors, or gray. I'm going to go ahead and select my colors here. And here we can see it added in the directions as the higher and the lower. And I can also edit this rule because maybe some of that information isn't what I want to see, or I want to see something completely different. I'm going to go ahead and have this highlighted here still. I'm going to go ahead, select my conditional formatting, and I'm going to say manage my rules here. Under the manage rules, we want to make sure we have selected our icon set, and we can say edit the rule. In here, I can change the type and I can change the value. On the left-hand side, we can see the arrow is up. Of course, when it hits the 67% here, it's going to go to yellow, and 33, it'll be down to red. Maybe I want to change this to 55, for example, and maybe I need this to be up in the 70 level. If I say OK, and then I'll say OK and apply here, and OK. Here we can see my data has changed. It looks like I need to get a lot of work going on this icon set. But here we can see it gives me a different value depending on what information I would like to see here. And then we have our custom rule here. I'll go ahead and select our custom 20% here. Okay, since we just edited a rule, we're going to go ahead and create a rule from scratch. So I went and highlighted my section here. I'm going to go into conditional formatting and say new rule. In here, I want to go ahead and select format only top or bottom ranked values. So I'll go ahead and select the one in the middle here. And here we can see we have the top, the bottom values. Here we can say 10. So this is going to be, we can say percent of the range here. And then down below here is our preview. If I go ahead, select format. In here, I can go ahead and change my color. So maybe I want the text to show up purple. I can change this to any color I would like, but this will be my text color. And then I go ahead and change my fill color. Within here, I can go ahead, maybe I want to make it green, or maybe that's too dark. I can go with one of these yellow ones, whichever color I like, but I want to keep it as a contrast so I can read it. And we'll say, okay. Here we can get a preview. So this doesn't look too bad, but if it's still not dark enough, we can go in here and we can change this to a lighter color or change the other one to a darker color. We say, okay. And here it looks like I can read this okay, and we'll say okay for this. And here we can see it highlighted my top 10% for me here. Of course, if I wanted to go ahead and change this, maybe this was supposed to be 20%, we can go back in here, manage our rule, and we'll go ahead and select our rule, edit our rule, and we want to change this to say 20, and we'll say okay. And we'll apply. Okay. And we now have our top 20% there. Okay. So with the conditional formatting, we're able to set up the rules with Excel to apply the conditional formatting. But of course, if we want to go ahead and manage our rules, I can go under my conditional formatting, just like we saw, to manage our rules. Right here, we can see it says current selection, but I can also say the entire worksheet. So it will show me all of the rules on the worksheet. So I can go ahead and edit any of the rules. For the rules, by default, any new rules added last will be the beginning, be the rule that it sees first. It will, if there is another rule using the same cells, the last rule that was created will override the older rule. That's for duplicate rules. If the rules are not the same, they're in the same cell, they will both be able to work together. Okay. And of course, let me close this out. If we want to clear our rules, if I go under conditional formatting, I have the option to clear rules from my selected cells or also from my entire sheet if I decide I don't want to have those rules there anymore. Okay. All right. So I know that was a pivot table and we analyzed and managed data. So we do appreciate your feedback. We do hope you enjoyed the presentation today and we're able to present to the level of a 10 for you. If there's anything you'd like to see different or added or changed, please let us know in the survey. If you have any questions, do feel free to ask. We do have a couple more minutes.